When we talk about emotionally immature parents, one of the first signs that often shows up loud and clear is their unpredictable emotional behavior. Now imagine this. You're a child, and one moment everything feels okay, you're laughing at the dinner table, and the next minute, without any clear reason, the mood shifts like a storm rolling in from nowhere. Your parent explodes in anger over something small, a misplaced item, a question they didn't want to hear, or even your tone of voice. Suddenly, you're not a child enjoying your home anymore. You're a tiny person walking on a minefield. This kind of environment doesn't just make a child uncomfortable, it wires the child's brain to stay on high alert all the time. It's like living in a house where any door might explode when you open it. You stop expressing yourself honestly. You second-guess every word. You hesitate before asking for help because you're not sure what version of your parent you're going to get. Are they going to be warm and loving today, or cold, irritated, or completely unavailable? The real danger here is not just the outburst, it's the inconsistency. Kids don't need perfect parents, but they do need emotionally stable ones, because stability builds trust, and trust builds identity. But when you grow up with unpredictable emotional responses, you learn something very toxic: that love might be unsafe, that approval is conditional, that your job is to manage other people's moods before they erupt. You become hyper-aware, almost like a radar, always scanning the room to predict emotional weather. And let's be real, no child should have to do that. It's not a child's job to regulate their parents' feelings. But that's what happens. You become the emotional caretaker for someone who was supposed to take care of you. Now let me tell you something important. This kind of environment does damage in a very quiet way. It doesn't always show up as obvious trauma. Sometimes it shows up as perfectionism, as anxiety, as being a people pleaser, as someone who always says yes because they're terrified of someone getting mad at them, or as someone who shuts down emotionally when things get intense, because that's what they had to do growing up to survive. Some of you right now might be nodding because you've lived this. You remember what it felt like to never know if today would be a good day or a bad one. To shrink yourself, dim your light, stay silent, just to keep the peace. You weren't just trying to be a good kid, you were trying to stay emotionally safe. And here's the thing, they weren't monsters. Most emotionally immature parents didn't want to hurt you. They weren't sitting around planning to make your life unstable. They were acting from their own unhealed wounds. Maybe they grew up in homes where emotional chaos was the norm. Maybe they never learned how to process pain in a healthy way, so their default setting became rage, withdrawal, or guilt tripping. That doesn't excuse it, but it helps you understand it, because understanding is the beginning of healing, not for them, for you. Because if you're still carrying the fear of someone else's emotional unpredictability, it's time to realize that you don't have to live like that anymore. You don't have to be on guard all the time. You don't have to silence your needs or apologize for your feelings or walk on eggshells in relationships that remind you of your past. You can unlearn that survival pattern. You can reclaim your right to feel safe, seen, and steady without the fear of an emotional explosion just around the corner. And that's the breakthrough moment, when you realize that their behavior was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their inner chaos. And now, as an adult, you have the power they never claimed. You can choose to break that cycle. You can become emotionally consistent with yourself and with others. You can be the steady, calm, grounded presence that you never received. Because healing isn't about fixing the past, it's about choosing not to repeat it. That's the shift. Let's talk about something that cuts deep but doesn't always leave visible scars: emotional disconnection. Now, if you grew up with emotionally immature parents, chances are you didn't just feel ignored, you felt invisible. Not because they didn't see you in the room, but because they didn't see you. Your feelings, your fears, your needs, your joys. It was like speaking a language they didn't understand, or worse, didn't want to learn. You might remember opening up about something that hurt you and hearing, "Stop being dramatic," or "You're too sensitive." And in that moment, your truth was pushed aside. What you felt was dismissed like it didn't matter. And slowly, without even realizing it, you started to believe that maybe your emotions really were too much. That maybe your reactions were wrong. That maybe you were the problem. But let me tell you something. Those words, that dismissal, that wasn't about you. That was about them. Because emotional immaturity doesn't just show up as anger or volatility. It shows up as the inability to sit with someone else's feelings, especially a child's. Because that child's pain reflects back their own emotional wounds. Wounds they've never looked at, never healed, never even acknowledged. And here's the truth. Empathy is a skill. It's not something you just magically have. It's something you learn. And if they grew up in an environment where emotions were shut down, punished, or ignored, then they never learned how to hold space for your feelings. So instead of offering support, they offered silence, or sarcasm, or criticism. and you were left feeling alone, even when they were right there in the room. Now here's what that does to a kid. You start building emotional walls. You stop trusting your own heart. You start monitoring your feelings like a guard at the gate. Is it safe to say this? Will I be judged if I cry? Am I too needy if I ask for comfort? And slowly you disconnect from your own emotional world because you were taught, directly or indirectly, that it wasn't welcome. And the damage, it doesn't end in childhood. It follows you into adulthood. You might find it hard to express what you feel in relationships. You might downplay your pain, avoid vulnerability, or feel like you're a burden whenever you ask for help. You might struggle to connect deeply with people, not because you're cold, but because that emotional muscle was never given the chance to grow. And if you're the kind of person who always listens to other people's problems but never shares your own, ask yourself this: were you ever taught that your feelings mattered? Or were you only valued when you were strong, quiet, and self-sufficient? See, this is the pattern. This is what emotional disconnection breeds. Not just in them, but in you. And you didn't choose it. You adapted to it. You became who you needed to be to survive the lack of connection. But survival is not the same as living. And now, if you want to heal, it starts with reclaiming the emotional space you were denied. So how do you do that? You start by giving yourself what they couldn't give you. Permission. Permission to feel. Permission to cry. Permission to be angry. To be joyful, to be confused. You start rebuilding that emotional bridge, first with yourself and then with others who can hold it. Because you can't heal disconnection with more disconnection. You have to show up. You have to let yourself be seen. And yes, it's scary, especially when you were taught to hide. But healing lives on the other side of that fear. And maybe the most powerful step you'll take is realizing this. You don't need them to understand you anymore. You need you to understand you. You need to stop waiting for the apology they may never give and start giving yourself the empathy they couldn't offer, because your feelings were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You were just a child looking for connection, and you deserved it. And now you get to give that connection back to yourself. Now let's talk about something that a lot of people don't recognize until much later in life: self-centered behavior that's disguised as parenting. See, emotionally immature parents often make everything about them: their feelings, their sacrifices, their struggles. And instead of being your guide, your supporter, your safe space, they become the main character in your life story. And not in a loving way, in a controlling, emotionally manipulative way. It starts subtly. Maybe they always reminded you of everything they gave up for you. I could have had a better life if it wasn't for you. Or, after all I've done, this is how you treat me. And at first you might think they're just expressing how hard life was for them. But over time you realize something darker. Their love came with a price tag. Their support came with guilt. Their care came with strings attached. And as a kid, what do? You internalize it. You start thinking, maybe I do owe them everything. Maybe I am ungrateful. Maybe I should stop asking for what I need. And that's exactly how the manipulation works. It's not obvious. It doesn't come in screaming or threats. It comes in quiet guilt, in emotional debts that you never signed up for. They start playing the victim. They act hurt when you set boundaries. They twist your independence into rejection. You finally start to build a life of your own, and instead of being proud, they feel abandoned. Instead of cheering you on, they accuse you of being selfish. Because in their world, your growth threatens their control. Your happiness challenges their narrative. And here's the real cost. It teaches you that love is conditional, that love means shrinking yourself, putting others first, and staying small so you don't trigger someone else's insecurity. That's not parenting, that's emotional control. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You remember moments where you needed comfort, but they made it about their pain. You were going through something real, heartbreak, failure, anxiety, but somehow the conversation always ended up being about them, about how your struggle was affecting them. And just like that, your emotions were no longer safe. Your needs became threats. You were made to feel guilty for simply being human. That kind of dynamic wires your brain to believe that you're responsible for other people's feelings, that you must fix, manage, or protect others emotionally, even at the cost of your own well-being. And let me tell you something, that's not love, that's conditioning, and it's heavy. It follows you into adult relationships, into friendships, into your work life. You end up overextending yourself, over-apologizing, over-explaining, because somewhere deep down, you still feel like you have to earn your right to exist. And the saddest part, you probably thought this was normal, that this was just how parents show love. But love doesn't guilt, love doesn't manipulate, love doesn't demand that you sacrifice your identity to protect someone else's ego. It's time to call it what it is. This isn't parenting, it's control wrapped in the disguise of care. And here's where the healing begins. When you stop confusing guilt with love, when you stop believing that someone else's unhappiness is your responsibility, When you finally realize that their sacrifices were their choices, not your burden to carry. You're not ungrateful for wanting peace. You're not selfish for setting boundaries. You're not cruel for choosing your own healing over their comfort. You're reclaiming the power that was slowly taken from you, one guilt trip at a time. And here's the breakthrough. Once you see the pattern, you can break it. You don't have to repeat it in your own life. You don't have to live under the weight of their expectations anymore. You can build a new definition of love, one that's rooted in freedom, not fear. Because real love allows you to breathe. Real love lets you grow. And real parenting, it's not about control. It's about raising someone strong enough to live without needing approval at every step. And that strength starts with you. One of the most damaging traits of emotionally immature parents is their complete avoidance of accountability. They'll do everything in their power to avoid admitting they were wrong. And I mean everything. You bring up something that hurt you, something real, something honest, and instead of owning it, instead of even acknowledging it, they twist it. Suddenly, it's not about what they did. It's about how sensitive you are, how you misunderstood, how you're ungrateful, or the one that stings the most. After all I did for you, this is what I get? That phrase, I did everything for you, becomes a shield, a weapon, a way to shut you down. Because what they're really saying is, you're not allowed to hold me accountable because I gave you something once. Whether it was money, food, a roof over your head, those basic responsibilities of being a parent are now treated like favors you should spend the rest of your life repaying. And suddenly, your pain becomes a threat to their image. Now here's the thing, we all make mistakes. No parent is perfect, no human is. But emotionally mature people admit it. They say, you're right, I hurt you, I didn't mean to, but I did. That's growth, that's love, that's courage. Emotionally immature parents, on the other hand, fear accountability like it's poison. Because to admit they were wrong means confronting parts of themselves they've spent their entire life running from. So instead, they deflect, they deny, they gaslight. And if you've ever brought up something valid, something from your childhood that stayed with you, and you were told that never happened, or you're making things up, then you know exactly what that feels like. You start doubting your own memory, your own truth, your own emotions. You ask yourself, did I exaggerate? Am I overreacting? And the gaslighting works, not because you're weak, but because you've been conditioned to question yourself instead of them. And that's the trap, because their refusal to own their actions doesn't just stall their emotional growth, it blocks yours too. It teaches you to suppress, to tolerate, to carry wounds in silence. And most dangerously, it convinces you that your feelings don't matter unless they're validated by someone who refuses to validate them. But let me tell you the truth, your feelings do matter. Whether they acknowledge them or not, whether they accept responsibility or not. You are not crazy, you are not ungrateful, you are not difficult, you are simply someone who needed honesty, closure, a real apology. And if you never got it, it's not because you were wrong, it's because they weren't ready to face their own reflection. And that's hard. That's heartbreaking, because as children, we naturally look up to our parents. We see them as giants, as protectors. And when those giants refuse to admit when they've hurt us, it can shake our entire sense of safety, our identity, our self-worth. We begin to think, if even they won't acknowledge what I've been through, maybe I'm not worth acknowledging. But let me remind you, your truth doesn't need their permission to exist, and healing doesn't require their apology. It starts when you stop carrying the weight of their denial, when you let go of the need for them to change and start changing the way you hold space for yourself. You stop chasing validation from people who are emotionally incapable of giving it. You stop watering dead plants. You stop bleeding from wounds you didn't create. And here's what happens when you choose accountability. You begin breaking generational cycles. You become the parent, the partner, the person who says, I'm sorry, I see you, I hear you, I want to do better. You take responsibility, not just for your actions, but for the healing that was denied to you. And that's how legacies change. Because at the end of the day, it's not about blame, it's about truth. And truth has power. Truth breaks chains. Truth sets you free, not because it fixes the past, but because it gives you the power to shape a future that looks nothing like it. And the most powerful words you can speak to yourself now are these. I don't need them to take accountability to finally heal, because I'm ready to take accountability for my own life. Let's talk about the damage, the long-term, invisible weight that stays with you when you've been raised by emotionally immature parents. Because this isn't just about what happened in your childhood, it's about how those early experiences shaped your wiring. It's about how you show up today, in your relationships, your career, your inner dialogue, your ability to love, to trust, to breathe freely without that tight knot in your chest. And for many people, they don't even realize that what they're struggling with now didn't start last week. It started years ago. In a home where emotions were dismissed, boundaries weren't respected, and love came with hidden conditions. You might find yourself constantly overthinking every little thing, replaying conversations, analyzing tones, wondering if you said the wrong thing. And it's not because you're paranoid, it's because you were trained to walk on eggshells, to anticipate emotional landmines, to make sure they didn't explode, even if it meant you had to shut down your own truth. That hypervigilance became your survival strategy, and now it's your everyday reality. You might struggle with self-worth. Deep down, there's this lingering belief that you're not enough, not smart enough, not attractive enough, not good enough. No matter what you achieve, that voice keeps whispering, you could have done more. And that voice, it's not yours. It was planted in you by someone who didn't know how to affirm you, how to support you, how to make you feel seen for who you were, not just for what you could do for them. So now even praise feels uncomfortable. Compliments feel like lies. And love feels like something you have to earn, not something you simply deserve. Then there's the anxiety. Not always loud, but always there. That buzzing hum in the background of your life. The feeling that something's always off, always wrong, even when everything's going fine. Because peace feels unfamiliar. Calm feels suspicious. You've gotten so used to being in survival mode, you don't know what it means to actually feel safe. So your nervous system is still operating like the danger is right around the corner, even when it's long gone. And let's not forget, people-pleasing, saying yes when you want to say no, apologizing for things that aren't your fault, putting others first, even if it drains you. Why? Because you learned early on that love was conditional, that being good meant keeping the peace, staying quiet, pleasing others, shrinking yourself to fit into their expectations. And now, even as an adult, you're still performing, still adjusting, still trying to win approval that should have been unconditional from the start. But here's the truth I want you to sit with. These things you're struggling with today, your anxiety, your self-doubt, your perfectionism, they're not flaws. They're symptoms. Symptoms of growing up in an environment that didn't know how to nurture you emotionally, symptoms of carrying responsibilities that were never yours, symptoms of a childhood where you weren't allowed to just be messy, loud, emotional, human. So let's stop blaming ourselves for the ways we learned to survive. Let's stop calling our coping mechanisms weakness. Because what you developed wasn't weakness, it was adaptation, it was intelligence. It was the child in you doing whatever it took to stay emotionally alive. And now, as adults, we have to learn a new way. A way that honors that past, but doesn't stay trapped in it. Healing begins when you stop judging your reactions and start understanding them. When you stop saying, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what happened to me? That shift right there is everything. Because once you understand where it came from, you take your power back. You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as healing. And yes, it's a process. It takes time. You'll have days where old habits sneak in, where you second guess yourself, where you over-apologize, where you feel guilty for putting yourself first. But now you have awareness, and awareness is the beginning of change. You start catching yourself. You start choosing differently. You start speaking to yourself with more compassion, more patience, more truth. You don't heal by waiting for someone to apologize. You heal by giving yourself what they couldn't. Safety, validation, boundaries, love. You show the younger version of yourself that it's safe to feel now. It's safe to rest. It's safe to take up space. You're not trapped anymore, because the damage they caused doesn't define you. But how you choose to rise from it, that does. Healing begins the moment we stop running from the truth. When we finally sit down with ourselves and say, this is what happened, this is what I went through. Not to blame, not to hate, but to see, to name the pain so it no longer controls us in silence. Because what we don't name, we carry. And what we carry without awareness, we repeat. Many people think healing is about forgetting. It's not. It's about remembering with clarity so you can finally release what was never yours to begin with. You start by looking at your story without distortion, without minimizing it, without justifying the people who hurt you. You say, yes, they were my parents. Yes, they had their own pain, but that doesn't erase mine. That level of honesty is the first doorway to freedom. Because when you speak your truth, even just to yourself, you take back your power. You stop waiting for them to change, to apologize, to validate you. You become your own witness, your own anchor. And once you've named it, once you've acknowledged what actually happened, then comes the next part. Boundaries. And let me be real with you. Setting boundaries is hard, especially when you weren't raised with them. When your emotions were dismissed, your needs ignored, and your role was to make everyone else comfortable. So now, even the idea of saying no can feel like betrayal. But hear this, boundaries are not rejection. Boundaries are self-respect in action. Boundaries are how you say to the world, this is what I will allow, this is what I won't, this is where I end, and someone else begins. The guilt that shows up when you set a boundary, that's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something new, something your inner child never got to do. Protect yourself emotionally. Say no without fear. Say yes without obligation. You're not shutting people out. You're finally letting yourself in. And maybe that's the first time in your life that's happened. Now, once you've started setting those boundaries, it's time for the deepest work of all, reparenting yourself. This is where you take on the role your parents never could. You become the consistent, loving, emotionally mature presence you needed. You learn to speak to yourself with gentleness, with structure, with love, not only in moments of success, but especially in moments of struggle, because that's where healing sticks. When you're triggered, when you fall back into old patterns, when you hear that old voice saying, "You're not good enough," that's your chance to do it differently. You talk to yourself the way a loving parent would. You don't punish yourself for slipping. You guide yourself. You comfort yourself. You remind yourself that progress isn't linear and that you're safe now. You build routines that support your emotional safety. You hold space for your feelings without judging them. You validate your needs instead of suppressing them. That's reparenting, not perfection, but presence. You create the emotional home you never had, and you do it one day at a time. One choice at a time, one new belief at a time. And yes, it's tiring. Yes, you'll have days where you fall back into people-pleasing or self-doubt. That's okay. The goal isn't to be flawless. It's to be aware, to be intentional, to be loving. You give yourself what was missing: consistency, safety, and compassion. And when you start living this way, something changes. You no longer feel like a helpless child stuck in the same cycle. You feel empowered. You feel connected. You feel alive. You stop trying to fix others and start nurturing yourself. You stop needing permission to be happy. You stop chasing the love you never got and start becoming the love you always needed. That's what healing is. It's not a destination. It's a relationship with yourself. And when you show up with truth, with boundaries, with reparenting, it transforms not just your life, but every life you touch after that. Because healed people don't just heal themselves, they become the chain breakers, the cycle shifters, the ones who say, "It stops with me, and it begins with me too." If any part of this message resonated with you, pause and ask yourself, how long will you keep carrying wounds that someone else caused? Now is the time to heal, for yourself and for the relationship you're building with you. What do you think is the hardest part? Setting emotional boundaries or learning to love yourself again? Let me know in the comments. If this video touched you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful content like this.